In this video, I want to do something I don't think I've done before on the channel and talk about film and score soundtracks exclusively. We're not going to talk about the movies themselves, just the music behind them, and we're going to specifically be talking about my favorite film soundtracks from 2023. Last year was really great for soundtracks all around. I had some ones that I absolutely loved, and we even just had some generally really good ones from different films. So in this video, I'm going to be sharing my picks for 7 of my favorite soundtracks from last year from movies and hone in on the details of them, some of my favorite tracks, why I think they kind of stand above the rest with all the music and soundtracks that we got this past year from all those movies. So the first soundtrack I want to focus on is For Past Lives, composed by Christopher Bear and Daniel Rawson. Overall, I thought this soundtrack just had a really ethereal kind of sound to it. It had a very organic nature to it all. It heavily utilized the piano, which I thought was beautiful. It's one of my favorite instruments to hear with all of the creative things that you can do with a piano. They really tapped into that for this soundtrack. And I really thought there was also a timeless nature to this soundtrack. If you're familiar with the movie, you know that it takes place over at least a couple of decades. And so it goes back to the 90s all the way up to the 2020s. And the soundtrack is consistent throughout, but I think that kind of enhances that timeless aspect of it and the attribute that it carries of it uses the same instruments and has the same kind of style and tone and melodies and stuff throughout, but it fits into both the time back in the 90s and the childhood of the characters we're following, as well as in their modern contemporary lives as well. And that's a testament to how great the music is and the work that they put into designing it in that kind of a way. Along with that timeless nature, I really think there's a nostalgic aspect to it as well. Like I said, it fits into the modern time with what instruments and sounds that it has, but it also kind of taps into that nostalgia bone a little bit as well. Going through the album, listening to it, this is one I've gone and listened to a lot throughout the time since I've seen this movie, which is really only like a month ago now. But I've really enjoyed going back and listening to just the music behind it all. If you go and look on the album, actually, there's some really cool kind of naming sequences that they did with some of the tracks. You have one song titled If You Leave Something Behind and another one, You Gain Something Too. Really cool, just kind of, alpha, omega, beginning, end type thing of the tying it in. And then another one was Do You Remember Me? And then another song titled I Remember You. Just some really cool creativity put into the naming of the songs that I really enjoyed. In Yun is one of my favorite tracks from the movie. I think not only does it apply to a lot of the theme and the messaging of the movie, but the music for it is really great. It has this magical kind of sense to it. It has a blend of a Western and an Asian feel, I think. The way that they play the instruments throughout, because this one utilizes some stuff with some string instruments, like continues with the piano as I've mentioned, and it just has a really good blend of the Western Asian feel to it, which fits into the theme of the movie being an Asian immigrant family. The track Bedroom is another favorite of mine, one of the best scenes in the movie, and one that has beautiful piano work throughout and a really good combination of instruments. It's a very common theme throughout this soundtrack. Another track, 8,000 Layers. This is one that for me, it just feels out of this world. It feels like I'm stepping outside of the planet Earth in something completely different and unfamiliar, and it totally works. See You, one of the final tracks for the movie and the album, is one that just draws up every emotion in the scene that it's played through as the final sequence between some of the characters, and it just hits so hard. And like I said, it just draws out each of those emotions that you've been feeling throughout this story and throughout the movie and puts them on display in a beautiful way through that music. And then the final original song that was put in this movie as we kind of wrap into the final scenes, move into the credits kind of stuff, we have Quiet Eyes by Sharon Van Etten. And this one, like that See You track, it just hits so hard. The lyrics are so applicable to the events and the story that's taken place, and the music that is, and the music that's there along with those lyrics being sung fits perfectly in with the rest of the music for the film and totally just sends it off in a great way. Next soundtrack I want to talk about is for the movie Elemental from Thomas Newman. Thomas Newman is one of those really, some ways, at least for me, underrated composers out there. A lot of the times I'm listening to a soundtrack, I'm like, I wonder who did this one. Because I mean, as much as I'm familiar with, there's a lot more I'm unfamiliar with. And it's like, oh, Thomas Newman. Like, he's just one of those consistently great composers. And for Elemental, he really tapped into something different here. I think the musical variety, especially with the way that wind instruments are utilized throughout this movie, is beautiful. And I think that there is amazing vocal and choir work as well. Like I said, with the wind instruments and the way singing is utilized throughout the score for this movie is absolutely beautiful. It's another one like Past Lives, as it has a very ethereal kind of mood to it all and sound, and I absolutely love that aspect of it. And speaking of the vocals and the choir work, the tracks Across the Ocean and Bubble Date have amazing vocal work, and just those two tracks alone, I think, really capture what's the heart of this movie. Shasha Orisha is another track on here, and this one really enhances the culture of the Firish people, and there's a number of other tracks that kind of fit into their culture and society that I think just really flesh out what their culture is all about and really helps you to better understand who they are, I think, through the music. And it's really, really well done. So Shasha Orisha, if it's pronounced that way, that's just the way I'm pronouncing it, as well as any of the other tracks that have a name that sounds something like that, all of those I really thought were great. And then we got the track Meet the Ripples. This one is totally fitting with the Wade character and his family as they're introduced. It's jazzy, it's smooth, it has a flowiness to it all, and I thought utilizing that style and genre of music was perfect for these characters. And then you got the original song Steal the Show by Lauv, however you pronounce it. This one is another one, just fits perfectly all around. It totally works within the soundtrack. It's one I've listened to on its own and added to kind of like chill out playlists that I have. It's one of my favorite original songs from a movie last year, and it's a really, really great one. The next soundtrack I wanted to showcase is for Oppenheimer, composed by Ludwig Göransson. Ludwig Göransson is quickly becoming one of my favorite composers of all time. I think his music is incredible. The creativity that goes into it just astounds me every time. Tenet is still one of my favorite soundtracks to listen to, but the work that he put into Oppenheimer is incredible. One of my favorite instruments, if not my favorite instrument within classical music, is the violin. I just love what you can do with a violin, the range that there is within genres and sounds that you can do with it. I think it's so interesting. And the fact that the violin is the primary instrument used in Oppenheimer just had me over the moon throughout this movie. Looking at specific tracks, because there's a lot of them I want to focus on, we have the one called Fission. This one has kind of a very classical vibe to it all, but there's a little bit of a synth flair thrown into it that I really liked, kind of showing that clash of the traditional side of things with this new direction that the world is going in through the Oppenheimer character. I think it really works well. Then one of the most iconic songs from this movie, you have Can You Hear the Music? This one has incredible violin work. If you have the Blu-ray for Oppenheimer, there's a ton of bonus features on it, and one of them talks about the music for this one. The work that they had to put into just this track to get the violins to sound the way that Ludwig wanted them to sound and follow that progressive tempo of the song is incredible, and it took them days to finally get it right. So if you have that Blu-ray, check out that bonus feature for the music, because it's incredible watching them put that together, and getting to see the payoff of them actually being able to perform it live is fantastic. Another track that I thought was really great is Quantum Mechanics. This one has a feel of very eye-opening, I think. It gives you this new sense of discovery and excitement along with it, and that follows along with the Oppenheimer character as he's pursuing this new direction for his life and his passions. And I think the song complements the scene so well. It's kind of a montage type scene as he's learning and developing these skills and abilities, and it totally works, and it's a really good companion to that scene. Next track we have is Manhattan Project. This is one that from beginning to end has very high stakes in the sound of it all, and it just embodies this sense of fear and tension throughout. And then leading into from that Manhattan Project track, we have American Prometheus. This one, oh my gosh, the use of violin in this song is incredible. Another fantastic utilization of that instrument there. And it just builds up to this really great climax at the end of that track. And then again, leading into what becomes the Trinity Test track. This one is one of the most like anticipation filled songs that I've heard in a long time. For over 5 minutes, this track just builds and builds and builds in its tension, its tempo, and its pacing. And when it reaches that climax of that tension and releases, it's beautiful. So one of my favorite tracks from the movie for sure is Trinity. And then as the movie gets to its end and reaches its kind of wrapping up point, we have Destroyer of Worlds as a track and the track Oppenheimer. These just embody the heavy weight of everything we've just experienced, everything that Robert J. Oppenheimer has gone through as a character up until that point, getting to see in such a devastating way the payoff of all of that and how it has affected him as a human being. And I think it does that incredibly well. So Oppenheimer has been one of my favorite soundtracks to go back and listen to. There's so many incredible tracks throughout that utilize so many great instruments, most notably the violin, in fantastic, incredible ways. Next soundtrack we have is for The Killer. This one is composed by Trent Reznor and Atticus Ross. If you are someone who listens to soundtracks, ears always perk up when Atticus Ross and Trent Reznor pop up. They do some fantastic work. Some of their most notable stuff is with The Social Network, and they do a lot of great stuff with David Fincher. Overall, this one is, I felt a little weird putting it on this list of favorite soundtracks because as much as I love the soundtrack for this one, a lot of the reason I wanted to include it is because of the overall sound design of this movie. So I'm not going to focus on necessarily any specific tracks, but I just want to talk about why I wanted to include it on this list. There is a mix of music and sound in this movie, throughout this movie, that is masterful. Just in the opening scene, the way that sound is utilized, it was one of the best audio experiences I had watching a movie this year. I watched this one at home on my surround sound system. I have what I think is a really nice surround sound system, and it really immerses you in everything that's going on in the scene thanks to that brilliant sound design and the way that the music is implemented. It comes in and out of different speakers. It becomes muffled at times. It becomes mono at times, depending on what POV you're in, whether you're in the character's POV or just the movie's POV. And it's really, really interesting to experience. So much of this music and the audio experience is an internal part of the character played by Michael Fassbender. And I think it's done so well and so brilliantly that it really helps you to get inside the mind of the character, what they're thinking, what they're feeling. And that's not something I saw a ton of this year, so it's something I really wanted to shed a spotlight on. There's a spontaneity and a flow to it all, where a lot of the music feels like it's almost reacting live to events. It's just so lively and interesting and exciting. So there's not necessarily any tracks I wanted to shed a specific spotlight on, but the overall soundtrack for this one, it's a really great one to go back and listen to. Next, we have Across the Spider-Verse, composed by Daniel Pemberton. Now, I have not listened to a ton of Daniel Pemberton's stuff. Really, the only stuff of his I've listened to is Into the Spider-Verse and Across the Spider-Verse. So I need to check out more of his work because he's so creative and so cool with the stuff he does with his music. The Spider-Verse soundtracks I think are some of the most iconic to come out of the past 10 years of music from movies. And I think Across the Spider-Verse starts off, and it's the way that the music is an extension of the characters, I think, and the story that's being told. It's so interwoven that if were you to watch the movie without this music, it would not hit as hard as it does. Some of the tracks that stand out to me specifically is the Across the Spider-Verse intro, leading into the track Spider-Woman or Gwen Stacy. It sets up and plays familiar to what Into the Spider-Verse was, and then it transitions into this opening heavy percussion drum track that is being played by Gwen Stacy in the movie, but obviously if you're listening to the soundtrack you don't see her, but it just shifts gears in a really interesting way of gives you that familiarity and then shifts gears into, hey, we're doing something different now. And when we transition into the Spider-Woman Gwen Stacy track, there's such a heavy emotional state for the character of Gwen in this one, and it's really well conveyed through the music, and it really enhances those feelings and struggles that she's experiencing. And then just jumping into her kind of theme for the movie, I'll talk about more about the theme in a minute, but her musical theme for this movie is one of my favorites in the franchise. I love the little jingle melody that comes on anytime her character comes on or is doing something interesting. It's really fantastic. So now I'm going to list off a couple tracks here. Spider-Man 2099, Creation of the Spot, Spider-Man India, and Spider-Punk. All of these tracks, as well as a number of other tracks throughout this movie, are kind of musical cues for characters, and they're some of the strongest I've heard in a while. What I mean by that is songs that come on and they're undeniably about a specific character. Obviously, a lot of great music can be done to just work for a movie, but when you can come up with a track or some melody or some type of jingle type thing that really embodies a character and immediately you recognize it as that character and an extension of that character, I think that's just brilliant design that goes into the design of the character, not only from a writing and a performance point of view, but just the feelings you have when that character is on screen. And the music for each of those characters is really great throughout. Like I said, those tracks that I specifically named are some of my personal favorites, but there's more beyond that on the soundtrack as well. Another track, one of my favorites in the movie, is Under the Clock Tower. This is also one of my favorite scenes in the movie. It's the one where Gwen and Miles are catching up and they're hanging out, sitting upside down under the clock tower there. And that scene is so powerful, but I think the emotional side of the music there really enhances it well. In addition to Pemberton's work, we also have the various tracks and songs by different rap and hip hop artists. Now, I'm not usually a rap and hip hop guy for the most part, but I love the music that they've chosen and the ones that are created for the Spider-Verse movies. Like I said earlier when I was talking about this movie, it so much is a part of what this film is, the music. Without it, the movie isn't what it is. It is so much a part of the character of the film. And I think not only does Daniel Pemberton's score enhance that in brilliant ways, so do these various tracks by all these different rap and hip hop artists. I have a playlist just for Into the Spider-Verse and Across the Spider-Verse of these different rap and hip hop songs, and I love playing it all the time. It puts me in such a focused and intentional mood that I always enjoy. Next, we have the soundtrack for the movie Suzume. Now, Suzume was composed by, it was a collaborative effort from Radwimps, which is, I think, like a pop band in Japan, and then Kazuma Jinochi, or Jinoki. Hopefully I'm pronouncing that correctly with one of those pronunciations, but this is another one that a good part of the reason, actually, I wanted to check out the movie was just because of the music in the trailer. I was so drawn to it because of its beautiful sounds to it also. If you've seen the trailer, you probably know what I'm talking about, but that's part of the reason I wanted to check out this movie. So that's a testament to how great the music is in it as well. So speaking specifically on some tracks, Abandoned Resort, Dreaming on the Ferris Wheel, Significant Precursor, and The Other Side of the Door. All of these tracks here have such a great blend of musical styles, specifically mixing a very classic sound of classical music with a synth and kind of electric techno vibe to them all. And I'm a big fan of both of those different genres, so when you put those together, it's a really great experience. First Aid is a track that's specifically done by Radwimps, and it has beautiful piano and string work into it. I actually thought this track was really reminiscent of one of the openings for Attack on Titan. Sometimes when this track would come on, I'd be like, am I listening to Attack on Titan? And so it's one, I don't know if it was an homage to Attack on Titan, but it has that kind of sound to one of the tracks that's on there from one of the Attack on Titan openings. Besides that, you got Cat Chase, one of the composed songs for this one. This one is a just explosion of jazz adventure that I really, really enjoy listening to on its own. And then you got Sky Over Tokyo, which is another one of my favorite tracks from this one. This one has amazing use of vocal work throughout this one, where it's going like like it's just beautiful. I'm not a singer, so I'm not even going to attempt it, but it's creates this mysterious and ominous mood that really totally works for what's taking place in the events of the movie, but on its own, it's an incredible song to listen to. Another track I really enjoy is Prayer. Now, this one just has an overall big epic scale to it all. It feels like something out of like a Lord of the Rings or a James Cameron Avatar movie, where it just, the sense of scale is immense. It's huge, and it just goes firing on all cylinders to the musical instruments used, the vocal work. It just feels big, and I love that part of it. And then the last track I wanted to talk about, this one is the title track, Suzume. This is one that has a really simple and catchy melody to kick you off. This is actually the one that was utilized in the trailer that really drew me in from the beginning, where it goes like bum bum ba da da dum da. Like, I love that. Super catchy. And then it just rolls into this great song, one of my favorites from this past year and one of my favorite songs from the movie. Once it kicks in the movie, I was all in. It was perfect. And if you listen to that song progress, that do 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 do, like the sound and the instruments follow along with that kind of melody, even when it's not being sung. You can hear it in the instruments and the progression of the song throughout. It's really well composed. I absolutely love that track. And the Suzume soundtrack overall, one of my favorites to go back and listen to from this past year. And then finally, the last score that I wanted to talk about is for the movie The Holdovers, composed by Mark Orton. This one utilizes existing songs in the real world and brings those into the soundtrack, as well as having Mark Orton compose some stuff. So some of my favorite tracks, probably Drive to Boston and It's Christmas. They just have the soundtrack overall for this movie just sucks you in. From the opening scene, it brings you back to this nostalgic, whether you've been in that time or not, but you have that nostalgic feel for the 70s that the movie takes place in. I am someone, I'm from New England originally, so anytime you can capture the feel of New England and bring in that nostalgia, you already have me. So I love that this movie did that, not only visually, but in its music. It has this style to it that I absolutely loved. It's very Christmassy, so the mood of kind of a Christmassy and still a bit of like a depressing, dreary way is so well composed and choreographed throughout musically. And then as the movie wraps up to going into that See Ya Into the Unknown track, I loved it. I feel like this movie, after watching it, I need to give the one I'm about to say a rewatch to kind of see where it actually compares, if so. I feel like The Holdovers is kind of like the Christmas version of Good Will Hunting. Now, it's different enough story-wise, but some of the essential plot elements and the way that the music is used in this movie, it was very reminiscent of Good Will Hunting for me. So I'd be curious if I'm the only one who thought that. So if you feel like The Holdovers is kind of the Christmas version of Good Will Hunting, let me know in the comments down below. If I'm crazy, tell me I'm crazy too. So those are my favorite soundtracks from 2023. One I did want to mention as kind of an honorable mention is the Godzilla Minus One soundtrack. I did not want to put it on my official list because I still have not had a chance to see the movie. And usually I'm not someone to listen to a soundtrack when I haven't seen the movie yet because I want to experience it for the first time in it. But I'm a big fan of the composer Naoki Sato. He's composed the most recent two Rurouni Kenshin movies, and I'm a big fan of his work. So I've listened to a couple of the tracks from the Godzilla Minus One movie, and I really like them. I can't wait to experience this movie. Once this comes out on Blu-ray, I'm a day one pre-order on it. I can't wait to watch it. So a bit of an honorable mention there as one that would have potentially made the list, but I didn't feel right putting it on there since I haven't seen the movie yet. So those are my favorite soundtracks from this past year. I would love to hear your thoughts on this list in the comments down below and some of your favorite soundtracks as well. So please join me down there and share your picks. Thank you for sticking around to the end of this video. I hope you enjoyed doing something a little bit different. I will see you in the next one.